One should know that today's discussion is being recorded, so conduct yourself accordingly. You will receive a link to that recording in an email following the conclusion of today's event. You can also find the recording on the Ash Center's YouTube channel. We're going to reserve about the last 15 or 20 minutes to respond to questions from people in the audience. You can submit questions anytime via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now, we have an election in the United States that is just 5 weeks away. While much of the national discussion is focusing on the horse race, who's ahead, how close it would be, and who's saying what about whom, today we're focusing on a much more fundamental challenges to our democracy. What are the challenges that are to making this election successful, to making sure everyone has the opportunity to vote, to count all of those votes promptly and accurately, and for the American public, importantly, to trust that this election was free and fair? The answers to those questions will be determined largely at the local and state level. Unlike many other countries, elections in the United States are highly decentralized, not just down to the states, but in most cases down to the dozens of counties and many localities in each of those states. Today, we're talking to some of the true heroes of American democracy. These are the people on the front lines who are making democracy work, facing the challenges of election skepticism and distrust, monkey wrenches from bad actors, lawsuits from both the right and the left, poor funding, an aging and sometimes demoralized workforce, and as we're seeing in the tragedy in North Carolina and surrounding states, natural disasters. All of this while the whole world is watching to see whether America's 2024 general election will be successful. Here are 4 people who are responsible for American democracy in 4 of the states where it is under the greatest pressure this year: Michigan, North Carolina, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. So no pressure at all, panelists. Jocelyn Benson is Michigan's 43rd Secretary of State and a graduate of Harvard Law School. Karen Brinson Bell is the executive director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections. Unlike many other states where there are secretaries of state, North Carolina, the chief election official, who is Karen, is the executive director of a state board of elections. Adrian Fontes was elected as Arizona's 21st Secretary of State in 2022. And finally, Governor Josh Shapiro appointed Al Schmidt as acting Secretary of the Commonwealth in January 2023, and Al officially became Secretary on June 29th, 2023. Finally, as we're entering this election season, we'd like to remind those who are eligible to register to vote, check your voter registration status, and make a voting plan. We also want to take this opportunity to let Harvard community members know about the Harvard Votes Challenge, which is a nonpartisan initiative that strives to build a civic culture at Harvard by increasing voter registration and participation across the entire community. We invite all participants to learn more at voteschallenge.harvard.edu. In lieu of individual remarks, I'm going to ask each of our 4 panelists a few questions before we get into the audience discussion. Secretary Benson has to leave early, around 12:15, so I'm going to toss the first question to her. Jocelyn, especially after 2 assassination attempts against former President Donald Trump, a lot of people are worried about political violence, among other things that might go wrong between now and Election Day. What are you most concerned about going wrong in Michigan? Is it flaws in the process, legal vulnerabilities, groups that try to block other people from voting, political violence and intimidation of you and your workforce, which you've experienced personally? What's at the top of your mind in terms of things to watch out for?
Well, thanks for having me and for hosting this important discussion. Great to be here with all of my colleagues from these states that are all going to uniquely be under the spotlight. And Karen, I hope in particular everything is well in North Carolina and all that you all are dealing with in this moment. I think, North Carolina's experience is one example. Natural disasters certainly are something that are always top of mind for us as officials. And now in this era of political violence, as you mentioned, also being prepared for disruptions or other types of interference with our elections is top of mind as well. So as we now enter these next 6 weeks we are hoping for the best, but planning for every contingency as we have for the last year, really. And that means in particular bracing ourselves for the potential for disruptions that could even turn violent, that are a direct result of a lot of the misinformation that folks have been fed over these last several years. And I think, leading into a moment now where what keeps most of us up at night, I believe in this moment, is the potential for violence on election day, and our hope that that doesn't occur, and our preparation to ensure, in the rare instance that it does, that we will be there to mitigate and frankly also seek consequences for those who would disrupt our election.
Thank you very much for that. Just a little bit of a follow-up. Political violence has always been part of American politics. I think we're definitely seeing a sharp uptick, especially focused on, very unfortunately, you guys and your workforces and your teams. Where do you feel like you've been able to prepare your teams well for this kind of horrible possibility? And what have been the limitations in the ways that you can prepare for political violence and intimidation, Jocelyn?
Well, partnerships are key on all fronts. Partnerships with each other across states, partnerships with law enforcement, partnership at the federal level, and local officials. And so we've just been building partnerships on all fronts, and also recognizing that the best defense against the potential for violence is our citizens to be well prepared and committed to ensuring not just a peaceful transfer of power, but also a peaceful elections process. If and even if they aren't happy with the results. All fronts we're working to make sure we're prepared, but recognizing that, as always, it will be people of integrity at every level, in law enforcement, as first responders, as election officials, as voters, who will be required to lean in this moment to ensure we're all protected against any bad actors, foreign or domestic, who would try to interfere with our election.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe one not quite follow up, but going in a different direction that's maybe a little bit happier than the political violence possibility, which is very present. In Michigan and in some other states, you have laws and a ballot initiative in the last few years that provide for things like early voting and easier mail balloting. Do you feel like those changes will enable more people to participate in the electoral process this year? How are you feeling about those legal changes?
Well, we've already seen over the last several years, our first election with these new constitutional amendments was in 2020. And we've since seen back to back the highest turnout elections in our state's history. So it turns out all the policies that we study, from election day registration to the ability to vote from home or vote by mail, or the ability to vote early in person, all things that can access of our elections actually translated into more engagement among citizens. And that's a great thing, because the more people who are voting and participating, no matter how they choose to vote or who they vote for, makes the.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to Secretary Schmidt. Al, I think we have 50 states in the union, but yours is at the top of the list of attention. Pennsylvania, I think a lot of people are thinking, is a pivotal state, perhaps the most pivotal and closely watched state in election 2024. With all of us feeling nervous and on edge about the election, how are you doing right now? What are you doing to get through it? And in particular, what makes you optimistic, but then also what keeps you up at night about election 2024 in Pennsylvania?
Well, having run elections at the county level for 10 years, everything keeps me up at night, right? Except for now, instead of having one county to worry about, I have 67 counties to worry about. And in Pennsylvania, elections are really run at the county level. So the Pennsylvania Department of State has very little authority when it comes to election administration. So I have my 55th county visit this week, spending a few hours in each county to make sure that the Pennsylvania Department of State is being as supportive as we possibly can so that our counties can run elections smoothly. And, I heard for years about Department of State referring to us at the county level as our county partners. And I didn't really always feel that was entirely, while well-intentioned, entirely sincere. So spending a lot of time with them, listening to their concerns, and making sure that we can support them in every way, whether it's providing a new training unit, which we have to train new election directors or our task force to make sure that if there are any threats targeting our voters or our poll workers or our election officials, that everyone is prepared. So it's really not about worrying, it's about preparation. And that has been our focus so that election day can run smoothly in Pennsylvania and our votes can be counted as expeditiously as possible with integrity.
Thanks so much, Al. This is a follow-up question for you. I think it probably also applies to everyone else on this webinar, which is about vulnerabilities in the election system and the possibility that a single county could hold up the election for the whole country. So in Georgia especially, but I think it's also a possibility in Pennsylvania or Michigan or North Carolina. How much should we be thinking about and worried about the officials in a single county that might turn out to be pivotal in a close result in a state, just not sending the count in time and certifying its votes to hold up the state and potentially, therefore, the whole United States?
Unfortunately, 2 years ago, we had 3 counties in Pennsylvania refuse to certify. Fortunately, that gives you a little bit of experience in how to deal with these sort of situations. So the Pennsylvania Department of State took those counties to court to get a court order to compel them to fulfill their ministerial responsibilities as explicitly described in the law to certify the election results. So this time, should that happen, and I'm not anticipating it, but if it should happen, and we are always prepared, like I said, then we won't be taking days or weeks to file, to approach the courts for a court order. It'll be 12:01 a.m. the next morning if they fail to fulfill their statutory obligations under the law.
Thank you very much. And so I think what you've just pointed out is that the system relies on a bunch of different institutions. And many people say, well, if the election doesn't go well, it's on Al or it's on Jocelyn or it's on Adrian or it's on Karen. But once you file that court challenge, it's kind of out of your hands. And we all hope that the court will decide in a very speedy way. They might not, but that's not up to you, right? So it's a complex set of institutions.
And Archon, I think, people talk a lot about the hard work that election administrators and secretaries performed in 2020. And all of that is completely deserved. It can't be possibly overstated. But one thing that I think we sometimes lose track of or forget about is how our judicial system held fast in the face of an avalanche of litigation seeking to prevent our voters' votes in Philadelphia cast by eligible voters on or before Election Day from being counted, or to prevent certification from taking place as it should and is required to occur. And our judicial branch at the federal, state, and local level, Republican appointed judges, Democratic appointed judges, all of them found that there was no merit to any of that. And I know I and many others are just so grateful that the courts did what the law required, which is when you're making these accusations, there has to be some evidence of proof that simply did not exist with all of these paranoid fantasies that we encountered in 2020.
Thank you for that. So we're all very much hoping that it won't come to that, but that if it does, that the courts will act in an expeditious way. This next one is for Secretary Fontes. Adrian, we've heard a lot about Maricopa County and other parts of the state that have very active and vocal groups of people who deny the election results of 2020 and doubt the integrity of the election process and, frankly and personally, of you and other election officials and workers. What kinds of steps are you taking to reach out to people who actively just don't believe that this election will be fair? And is any of that going to work? Are you able to persuade people that the system works and is trustworthy? Or do you think that there's just a lot of folks who are just deeply skeptical and will just keep being skeptical?
Well, first, thanks for having me. And second, Karen, hearts and hopes out to all the folks out there suffering in the hurricane's wake. Look, this is a constant and ongoing battle. We've in Arizona had conspiracy theories and kind of weirdness going on for a long time. It's not lost on anyone that we're the ones who put the AZ in crazy. But the reality is that, we are charged with a specific task, and that is an enormous undertaking. And we have to make sure we get the fundamentals right. And because we've done well, and because we've had the fundamentals right for a long time, we can continue to fight back against the lies and the conspiracy theories and the nonsense as much as we do. And I'd say that the influence of those folks is waning. I mean, and as evidence, I present to you the results in our elections in 2022. We had an election deny or lose in the U.S. Senate race. We had an election deny or lose in the governor's race. We had an election deny or lose the Secretary of State's race. We had an election deny or lose, although narrowly, but still, in the Attorney General's race. And so when you ask the entire state of Arizona what they think you shouldn't be denying elections, not just because it is a corruption or a corrosion of the civic faith that we should have in one another as Americans, but also because it's bad for business, right? It chases away investment. It chases away people who are looking for a good, stable place to create their future, whether it's with their family or some other kind of endeavor. And so we're just out there making sure that we get the basic job done. And over again, as we've seen in all of our court challenges, we are successful in making sure that folks know that we are still running great elections in Arizona, and I think across the United States of America. I will just tack on one little interesting thing. Allen Company went to court against three of those counties. I think it was in Pennsylvania. We actually ended up indicting some of our county supervisors who didn't want to certify back in 2022. So there is a threat of criminal prosecution looming over folks. So I think 2024 is going to see far less of those types of shenanigans now that the state of Arizona has taken that particular action. I just kind of wanted to tie back to something because a lot of folks are wondering about that.
Yeah, that's great. So I was going to ask that, and I'll return to that question in a little bit. But you think that particular threat of county election officials not certifying, that threat has been reduced in Arizona because of the things that you've done since 2020?
Yeah, I mean, we even promulgated a rule in our elections procedures manual that was just taken down by the federal district court with, no kind of no sweat on me. But we were so far along we've got to preserve Arizona's electoral college votes that in anticipating this problem with the ECRA and the tight timelines that we had of potentially having to have like this nuclear option on the table of not including one of the county's votes, depending on if the courts weren't cooperating or whatnot. That having been now taken down in the district court, we're okay because of what the district court judge said. And what the district court judge said will help us after the election to make absolutely certain that all of the votes are put into play in time so that we can get certified for the Electoral College. And at the end of the day, it was a different end of the same means, but we're going to continue to fight with every possible angle that we can to make our case, not just in the courts and in the court of public opinion, but with voters generally, so that we can just kind of continue moving forward and just kind of stop the nonsense of looking backwards at grievances.
That's really helpful. So, I mean, yeah, Al, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. Just because counties are required to certify the election results reported to them by their precincts doesn't mean anyone is turning a blind eye to legitimate allegations of voter fraud, no matter how infrequent or any election irregularity at all. Those boards of elections can, should, and do refer those to federal, state, and local U.S. attorneys, attorneys general, or district attorneys for them to investigate further, provided there's any credible evidence. So it's not about forcing someone's hand to turn a blind eye to anything, just to be very clear about that. There's a whole procedure that would take place if there is any legitimate evidence of any sort of fraud or irregularity. But they still are required to complete certification nevertheless, and then let the rest of that process play out.
And from a legal perspective, I could very quickly, you can't fight against an election that has not yet been certified because you don't have official results to fight against. So the notion that, oh, we got to check on this fraud, we got to do all this stuff, you can't even start that legal process legitimacy until you have something to fight over, which would theoretically be those results. So the folks that are trying to intervene and slow down certification and all this stuff, what they're actually doing is slowing down their own capacity, if they have a legitimate reason, to challenge the election results, because there are no results until they're certified. So, it's just kind of there. It's almost like some of these folks are just defeating their own purposes by trying to delay things. And it's just silliness. Like somehow I think maybe they don't understand the process. I don't know.
But it is good news, I think, from Arizona and Pennsylvania. It seems like some of the things that happened in 2020 and 22, the institutional antibodies are kind of working and straightening these things out and maybe preventing some of the gaming, while, of course, we have to be vigilant and make sure that the elections have integrity.
And Arshan, I just want to add, and the secretaries have talked about this at several events, like there has been this constant effort of testing the system to try to identify vulnerabilities. And clearly bad faith actors intending to undermine confidence in the results or prevent certification from taking place are learning from that testing. But we are also learning as well to make sure that there aren't vulnerabilities, to make sure that if there are these efforts to preventing our voters' votes from being counted or certification being delayed, we're ready to go and support our voters' rights to make their voices heard.
That's fantastic. Thank you. This next question is for Director Brinson Bell. Karen, well, first of all, I'm joining the rest of the panel in expressing a great deal of sympathy for the very difficult position you and many other people in North Carolina are in due to the terrible destruction and death that Hurricane Helene has caused. It's one that we could have foreseen, but never in particular circumstances, that natural disasters possibly will be seeing more of these things because of climate change intersect with the machinery of democracy. Vote by mail has already started in North Carolina, as it has in many other countries, or many other states across the country. Are you concerned that the disruption of mail of an already stressed postal system caused by the storm will prevent some people from getting their ballots or mailing their ballots in? And what can you do and what are you doing that ensure that everyone has a chance to vote in the aftermath of this terrible storm?
Well, thank y'all for the sympathies and well wishes. The greatest effect is not on our coastal counties where you typically would think of a hurricane. This is the mountains of North Carolina. I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, but the mountains are my adopted home. I lived there for 20 years, attended college there, cut my teeth in elections administration by being a field support person for the 12 westernmost counties. So I know these roads. I've frequented the restaurants and the shops, and I know people who are personally dealing with damage to their homes and suffering through this. So it's very personal to try to address this situation. We do have a natural disaster declaration for 25 counties. The worst of the situation affects about 7 to 10 counties. We do have all counties accounted for now. That was one of the toughest challenges because it's not just power outages, it's and water service is out, but cell phone and other telecommunications, internet, and so forth. And so people are really struggling, but our elections folks, our elections family is resilient, and the outpouring of support from the other county offices. We have 100 counties in North Carolina, and we call ourselves Team 101, one state board of elections and 100 counties working together to ensure every eligible voter is able to exercise their right to vote. So in doing that, we prepare for any kind of natural disaster. I mean, let's think about the fact November 5th is, we could be seeing ice storms. We're a Super Tuesday state, so our primary could easily have been affected through winter storms or possible tornadoes. There's any number of things. And so what we work so hard to do in elections, and I think this is across the country, this is not unique to North Carolina, is we prepare. And then if we have dotted the I and crossed the T's and followed consistent methodical procedures, then we're ready to pivot when that crisis comes. And that crisis can be a natural disaster like we're experiencing in North Carolina, but it could also be, a power outage or an accident that happens near a polling place and you have to adapt. So I think in terms of voting absentee by mail, there are other circumstances that have impeded us. We did have a court case about which candidates would appear on the ballot that kept North Carolina from being first in the nation. That's a distinction we've had. We didn't realize it was a big deal until the pandemic, but we generally send ballots out before general elections 60 days out. So we should have been sending ballots out September the 6th. There was a court case dealing with, again, candidates on the ballot. The court said that we would remove some candidates, and so we started sending out military and overseas ballots on the 20th, and then civilian ballots went out on the 24th. That means that by the time the storm had struck Western North Carolina, many of those ballots were in the mail stream. And so we are certainly working with our Postal Service partners to know where those ballots are. Some of their facilities are closed currently. Doesn't mean they're damaged, but they're closed. And so mail service is not happening. We've got roads that are compromised, so delivery is not possible, but we are working through that. We're still very early right now. There are a lot of services not available in these communities, in these counties. And so, our emergency management officials are working closely with us to help us realize when can we have county offices back open, therefore when we can deal with the absentee requests. We're fortunate that with our military and overseas citizens and our visually impaired, we have electronic transmission that's possible. So that gives us a few added resources where we're not dependent upon the mail service. But I also can say, most North Carolinians vote in person. We even saw that during the pandemic, and it's usually during our in-person early voting period, which is a 17-day period in North Carolina that'll start October 17th. So we've got just shy of 250,000 requests right now across the state for absentee ballots. About not quite 5,000 have been cast at this point. So, we're tracking that. We do have a tracking service that we use to track the ballots in the mail stream. So that's helping us to identify. Postal Service is working with us. And what we're going to have to do, whether it's voters who are voting by mail or wanting to vote in person, is just really continue to gauge where we are in, just the devastation and what is possible. Luckily, we're not faced with what our counterparts in New Jersey did with Hurricane Sandy being 1 week out from Election Day. We've got 35 days. And we've, and less than that to be ready for early voting, but we've got a runway. And what we're going to just work on is how can we identify, how can we help each of these affected communities? Because we're going to have people who can't get mail service. So how do we get in-person voting to them? How do we, deal with people who are relocating to other parts of the state, be it temporary or permanently, getting word out to those folks? And so, just so much that we have to consider, and we're just taking it one bite of the apple at a time. And we have really good game plans. Our state board met yesterday to take one of their first actions with their emergency authority. We'll be putting more and more in front of them. The legislature is going to have a special session to deal with the recovery effort, and we may be part of that consideration as well. So just a lot going on in North Carolina, but the reality is that we don't stop elections. We figure out how to proceed, and that's what we're doing in this case too.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I read an article in the newspaper a bunch of years ago covering the election in India, and their election officials are very intrepid. And the story was about how a woman lived in a remote part of India, and these two election officials spent like 2 days getting out to the place where she lived in order to set up, the place so she could vote. And they were sitting there waiting. They didn't know whether she was actually going to come vote or not, but they had to be ready to receive her vote. So I'm telling the story because what I want to ask you is, in the face of the floods and the damage of the storm, do you feel well enough resourced to be able to try to reach all of these people in Western North Carolina, out away from the coast? Or are you really strapped for like the two people who spent 2 days traveling out to rural India? Like, how are you doing in terms of resource to make sure every North Carolina person can vote, eligible person?
We're still having to assess what resources we need. We had a hurricane come through in 2019 during our early voting period, and North Carolina National Guard worked with us to set up a temporary tent for voting. So
Oh, wow.
it may be that we take some of those measures. I helped conduct an election when there was a landslide that cut off a section of Haywood County, North Carolina, between the county seat and the Tennessee line. And we had provisions to address those folks. It was a precinct of about 24 people. So not quite as small as a situation as India, but we did, we worked to make sure that those 24 people could cast their ballot. And we're going to do the same here. It's going to take some time. But we are, like I said, we're just doing one bite of the apple a day. Right now, our focus is on how to keep absentee voting going. We're also nearing our voter registration deadline, which is next Friday. We do have same-day registration in North Carolina during the early voting period. But again, we're just focusing on those bit by bit. We're working with our partners. We have a strong working relationship with State Emergency Management. We are usually stationed with them on election day. So this is not a new coordination. This is an ongoing partnership, and they're ready to work with us. It may take generators, it may take temporary facilities, trailers or something to be brought in. It may take additional lighting or whatever, but we'll know more in the next few days. It is still early. They're still going through search and rescue. Unfortunately, the fatalities are up. And so right now, what we want to make sure we do is get our election offices up and running. We've got about 12 that are still closed out of those affected counties. And we want to make sure that they have their operations going. But, some of that means making sure that their personnel are safe and secure. And many of them have had their personal homes affected, or their access into the office is affected. And so, it's just taking it phase by phase, layer by layer, but that's our profession. We deal with logistics, we deal with technology, we deal with circumstance. We're very methodical in what we do, and we'll just keep working those systems. And at the end of the day, we are committed. Every North Carolinian who wants to cast a ballot is going to be able to.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for all of your intrepid work in this difficult time. Seeing what happened in North Carolina, and then Jocelyn also talking about the possibility of storms and natural disasters, which I think every election director is worried about. I was reminded of, I don't know how many people are fans of this HBO show Secession, but in season 4, there was a turn on election day where the plot was there was a fire in polling places in Milwaukee and they lost 100,000 votes, right? And I think I thought, well, maybe that's just TV drama, but I think we're seeing it versions of that play out. And, it's just the one problem is, well, if that happens, 100,000 people have been disenfranchised. That's terrible all on its own. But in this era of razor thin elections, those 100,000 people could the election could turn on how they voted or not, and whether their votes are counted. And then also with climate change, maybe we're going to see more crises like that. Turning the topic a little bit, maybe to the longer term, Karen, unlike Adrian and Al and Jocelyn, or at least unlike Adrian and Jocelyn, maybe a little bit unlike Al, you are an appointed official of a board rather than a Secretary of State with a party label. A lot of people think, oh, election administrators shouldn't have capital D or capital R labels. Do you think that you're being a director of a board of elections rather than a more political Secretary of State makes a difference in how easy or difficult it is to do your job? Or no, pretty much your job of directing the elections is like Jocelyn and Al and Adrian?
I don't know another way. I don't think it's right or wrong. It's just I don't know another way. They probably can't identify with what it's like to be the chief of election official of an independent agency. We do have a Secretary of State in North Carolina. Her job in elections is the electoral college part. So we'll conduct the elections and hand off those certified results. And the governor will do the certificate of ascertainment or ascertainment, sorry. And then that's our role. I do get cast as a partisan, unfortunately, at times because of our appointment process. The current makeup of the board is that it's 5 members appointed by the governor, and the majority is of the governor's party, and the other 2 members are of the next largest party. North Carolina is split. Our governor is Democrat. Our legislature is Republican-led. And so that creates its own friction. And we do have a law that's currently in court about the makeup of our state board. But in terms of how we do the work, we've had 4 state election directors in North Carolina. The first 2 worked in the field or in the position for over 20 years. My predecessor was in it for 6, and I'm past 5 now. So we'll see if I make it to 6. But we are appointed by the board. We do have terms, and so we have to come up for reappointment. And I was unanimous in my last term reappointment. And I have worked of the 4, I'm the only one that's actually ever been an election administrator. And so I think that's the distinguishing factor for me, is that I have been in those county shoes. I know what it's like to have to change out a polling place quickly, have to find those poll workers, have to process those voter registration forms. And so that's the distinction that I think I make in this role, is not whether it's easier to do because or different because I'm with an independent agency versus a Secretary of State versus elected or not. I think it's really, and so many of my colleagues here have that boots on the ground experience. And I think that's what's becoming such an interesting facet of the work that we're doing, and how we're able to speak to these processes and how we are so confident in our processes and the certification is because so many of us now, it is a profession and a field of study and work. And I think that's really the distinguishing factor in how at least things are function in North Carolina is I'm an election administrator. I'm a practitioner at the end of the day. And I'm thankful that I don't have to go out and campaign to do my job. No offense to anybody.
And the professional at the end of the day, I mean, having had the great pleasure of working a little bit with Al and Jocelyn, and not quite Adrian as much, but having known of your work, also very much election professionals. There's just no question in my mind about that at all. A comment from the audience, which is interesting and very positive, and surprising in a way. The person in the audience says, what you all are talking about is very reassuring. That is the 3 of you, or the 4 of you, are able to communicate all this so that voters it's a question. Are you able to communicate all of this so that voters have more confidence in and less anxiety about the process? Are you able to get this out there? And I think that's like people like me and journalists and many other people are saying, oh, the elections are fragile. We're on a knife's edge here. But what we're hearing is quite a different story from you guys who know more and have more authority over the process. Is like, no, we're moving the ball forward on this. Are you guys able to communicate the reassurance that probably maybe many American voters should have? In this
I think more than we were in the past. One of the interesting facets of this is since not so much 2016, but more since 2020, we've been on this slow rolling, and there's a lot more awareness. There's a lot more curiosity about these systems. And so we become sort of explainers in chief, and folks are actually paying attention to what we have to say now, because they've seen that the folks who are in the election denialism space, there's no substance there. There's no there, and there never has been. And so I think we're able to do it. And like in Arizona, I wish we had more resources to be able to get out there more. So that becomes a little bit difficult, but we try, and I think folks are paying attention to us because we do have the receipts, right? We're the ones with the evidence. We're the ones with the trusted information to push out there to the public. And so I think we are breaking through, but it's going to be a slow drip.
Yeah, good. This one is for Al. So Al, in Pennsylvania, you've had to deal with a lot of controversies, even litigation around mail ballots specifically. Is that a big concern of yours? Is people attacking the legitimacy or worries about malfeasance in mail-in balloting?
Well, I doubt any of us easily would make a prediction about turnout or make a prediction about who's going to win or lose. But I know we would all predict there's a lot of litigation in a presidential election cycle that we are all experiencing in every state, and we certainly have in Pennsylvania. Voting by mail, as you may know, is pretty new in Pennsylvania, beginning in primary 2020. Before that, we had only absentee ballot voting, where you had to be sick or you had to be absent from your municipality in order to cast your vote by mail. But beginning in primary 2020, thanks to our Republican House and our Republican Senate and our Democratic governor, which passed it in 2019, all voters can vote by mail if they choose, and has been something widely embraced in Pennsylvania. Another big change is because voters have a vote on a new voting system beginning at the latest in primary 2020, and this new system of voting by mail, there is a paper ballot record of every single vote that is cast, whether by mail or in person, whether by a hand-marked paper ballot at your precinct or a ballot marking device at your precinct, that is used in 2 audits after every election to ensure the tabulated results are accurate. The perversity, I think, of what we've all experienced is elections have never been more safe or more secure. Period. That's a fact. They have not. But all these changes have certainly come at a price. And when there are changes, people have questions, and they should have questions. And I think we're all doing our part in every state, in every county, to make sure we can answer our voters' questions when they have them. Undoubtedly, the megaphone of people spreading mis and disinformation is a lot louder than some of ours, certainly a lot louder than mine and the Pennsylvania Department of State. But we've got to do what we can to always tell the truth in the face of all these lies, seeking to undermine confidence in the results, seeking to prevent voters from casting their vote and have their vote counted, as frustrating as it sometimes is.
Thank you very much. This is a informational question from Stephen Starrett in the audience. So just quick go around, very simple question. How soon after the polls close on that Tuesday in November will you be able to announce the election results? Adrian, I'm just going to go around.
10 to 13 days, and we're not doing it any sooner because we're going to get it right. What the media says is what they say. Official results are official when we're done with them.
So 2 weeks after that Tuesday, you're thinking?
Yeah. Give or take.
Give or take. Al?
So we get that question a lot in Pennsylvania because our law, unlike many other states that have mail ballot voting, does not allow that process to begin until 7 a.m. on election morning. So when you hear about delays in Pennsylvania, it's not a delay at all. It takes time to count millions of votes with integrity, especially when you can only start at 7 a.m. on election morning. I hate to look up to other states like Florida, given, way in the past its experience and controversies and all the rest. But even Florida and any number of other red and blue states allow this process to begin earlier. And it's a technical problem with a technical solution that does not benefit any party, that does not benefit any candidate, and really a little bit maddening that we've known about this since 2020. But just to add two other quick things, I'm sorry. One, counties have acquired a lot of equipment since 2020 that will assist with sorting ballots, timestamping them, and all the rest, opening envelopes, extracting ballots, and all that. And counties in Pennsylvania have a lot more experience. 2020 primary was the first time they did it. So they all have several election cycles under their belt at this point. So they have more equipment and more experience, and the volume of mail-in ballot voting, while still really significant in Pennsylvania, has decreased since like the peak COVID environment in 2020. So fewer votes to count by mail.
I'm actually just going to jump in if I can and answer, since I do have to go. And thank you again, Archon, for having me today. I really appreciate it. We in 2020 had our unofficial results ready within 24 hours of the polls closing, and that's what we're aiming for again. Pennsylvania and Arizona went till Friday. I hope they can get it sooner. And I think the bottom line is we're all going to be working to, in a transparent, secure, and efficient way, tabulate every valid vote and only valid votes. And I'm grateful for all of your partnership in that work. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for joining, Jocelyn. Really a treat. Yeah.
Karen,
what about North Carolina? How long?
Y'all thought these were quick questions, but elections are complex and we're never quick. And at least we're not sound bites typically. So in North Carolina, we will be able to process absentee ballots during bipartisan board meetings starting today, 5 weeks out from the election, and then we will tabulate those on election day. So those will be our first results that are uploaded at 7:30 p.m. when the polls close. A difference in North Carolina from prior presidential elections is that we had in the past been able to upload the early voting, in-person early voting results at 7:30 p.m., but the legislature changed that, and we cannot close and tabulate those until the election day polls close at 7:30 p.m. So that's going to delay some of the results being reported. It will not necessarily take us longer into the night. We're not sure about that, but it will mean that those are being reported as election day results are reported. We were able to get our last of unofficial results posted at 12:28 a.m. back in 2020. So we're aiming for that again. If we can do that during a pandemic, hopefully we can do it through all the other changes that we're experiencing. Wow. But what, I think we've emphasized so much is that election night or unofficial, we go through a certification process to verify, to reconcile, so many things, to be ready to certify. And our county boards will do their certification on the 15th, which is 10 days after the election. And then the state board meets to certify on the 26th of November. And the other thing that I just always remind folks is that, for most of the country, we don't use the internet, we don't modem. So getting results to a county board of elections or any kind of central place doesn't happen instantaneously. This is not cup of noodle. We are going to shut down our polling places at the times designated in our state law. In North Carolina, if you're in line at 7:30 p.m., then we are permitted to allow you to vote at that point until we serve all the voters that were in line at 7:30 p.m. So any number of things have to happen. You have to shut down those polling places. You have to get the materials together, and then you have to transport them back to a central location, to the county board of elections. It may vary from state to state, but that's not going to happen immediately. In many of our counties, it's going to be a 45-minute to an hour commute on 2-lane windy roads in the dark for people who have worked 15, 16-hour days, who are usually 65 years of age or older. So let's give them some grace, give them some patience, and know that we'll get those results uploaded as quickly as we can. But the key for any election official is to be as accurate as we can be, and that's the goal when we're reporting the unofficial results and the official results.
Oh, that's so great. So 12:28 maybe unofficial results on 12:28 on Wednesday morning, and then maybe 10 days for county level certification, and then 2 to 3 weeks for state level certification.
That's right. We'll even aim for 12:27 this year.
All right. I'll hold you
1
to
minute
it
earlier.
All right. This one's for Adrian. Kind of a challenging question, I think. from Jamie Wilberforce. How will potential challengers in Arizona act, and how will you respond to concerns that voters are not properly certified for citizenship, but were allowed to vote anyway?
I'm so glad this question came up. So here's the bottom
Yeah.
line. I really am. So thank you, whoever asked the question. Here's the deal. Every person who votes in the United States of America signs under penalty of perjury an affidavit that they are a United States citizen. Everywhere, including Arizona. But in Arizona, we have this weird bifurcated system that that's all the certification you've given us, then you can only vote in federal elections, president, Senate, and Congress. And so anybody who's saying, oh, all these people are not certified, well, they're just as certified as you are in Massachusetts or Pennsylvania or California or anywhere else. That having been said, we have our state ballot, which is the rest of sort of the Paul Harvey rest of the ballot, right? Those folks who are voting a full ballot, which is almost everybody, have to have documented proof of citizenship on file, either with their county registrar or with the Department of Motor Vehicles from the state. Now, of late, and I know people have seen some headlines about we've got a whole this glitch at the MVD where they were supposed to be gathering this information and they didn't, and we had this lawsuit in front of the Supreme Court and all this stuff. Here's the bottom line of the way it works. Every voter in Arizona, with the exception of the occasional vanishingly rare instance, which we see across the entire country in tiny, tiny numbers, every person who's voting has met the same citizenship standard as in your state, as in your county, as in your city, every single one of them. But many don't have that documented proof of citizenship, which is a higher standard that we have in Arizona than anybody else does. And our good friends on the gaslighting side of the world will say, oh, none of those are certified or none of those people are citizens. And I'm mocking them because they're gaslighting everybody else in the world. That's just not true. What is true is that every registered voter in Arizona has signed under penalty of perjury that they are a United States citizen, just like every other U.S. citizen in the country. But some of them, and it's a smaller number, have not provided documented proof of citizenship, or now we've discovered because of some of these issues, and we're investigating it right now. We're opening up a full-blown investigation in what this office has been doing over the last years, what the Department of Motor Vehicles has for this higher standard. So have all these folks met this higher standard? We can't verify that right now, but they've all met the exact same standard as every other citizen in the United States of America has. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. We're still going to be moving forward with our election in spite of the fact that, yes, the Arizona Supreme Court, all of whom are, I think at this point, appointed by Republicans, all of them have indicated in the ruling that these voters don't have to meet that exceptional and rare standard to vote full ballots for the 2024 election. Moving into 2025 and 2026, that's a different story. We've got to cross that bridge when we get there. But I'm so glad that this came up, and I hope that sort of lays it out for everybody so you'll understand what's happening in the Grand Canyon State.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll have to rewatch what you just said on YouTube to get the full details, but it's an excellent explanation.
Sure.
So here's a super high information participant who's overseas, and I do not know what she says is whether it's accurate, but you will. So this is Katie Solon, who writes, many U.S. overseas voters can return their ballots electronically. Some states, like Michigan and Pennsylvania, require postal return. That is impossible, she writes, for many countries in the world. So voters who live in places with unreliable mail need to use expensive courier services, or it's not available at all. So this is like, I think she likes what Arizona is doing. So, and I don't know what North Carolina does. Would you endorse following the example of Arizona? And I don't know whether this is right, that overseas voters could allow secure electronic return of voted ballots, so overseas voters wouldn't have to worry about the unreliable mail system in the overseas countries, or an increasingly unreliable postal system in the United States, so they could have more confidence that they would be able to vote and their votes would be counted. First of all, Adrian, is that accurate? Do overseas voters, can they iPhone vote or electronic vote in Arizona?
Yeah, we follow federal law when it comes to our UOCAVA voters, our Uniformed Citizens and Overseas Voters. It is also true in Arizona that we have special election boards, for example, where folks with disabilities who cannot go from point A to point B will send a bipartisan board out to receive their ballot. Sometimes they will mark the ballot for the voter, seal it in an envelope. Same idea with our overseas voters. They will get us a version of the ballot that will be duplicated and then independently sent over to tabulation so that there is that continued anonymity sort of a thing. So we have those internal processes in a lot of these kinds of circumstances where it's non-traditional voting. It is allowed under federal law, and the state of Arizona does welcome all of those voters. I'm sure that there are processes across the country to make sure that these folks do get a chance to vote, because it's as important for us as it is for anybody else.
Okay, good. Al and Karen, are provisions for overseas voters different in your jurisdictions? Are there these electronic provisions?
My understanding is the questioner is correct, and that Pennsylvania, while it can provide the ballot electronically, must receive it in the mail postmarked within the period after Election Day, but postmarked on or before Election Day. And that certainly presents a unique hurdle for voters who are overseas, especially in remote locations, to get that ballot back. Those ballots are sent out well before the other ballots, or provided well before the other ballots, but undoubtedly there are challenges in returning it on time and postmarked.
Yeah, great. And Karen, North Carolina, a lot of people in the military community deployed oftentimes.
I'm a huge champion on this one. It's been a longstanding law in North Carolina that allows us to transmit ballots to the military and overseas citizens electronically, and also to have those returned electronically. We've even stepped up our game. In 2020, I worked with the legislature to get approval for us to use a portal system that allows for our military and overseas to mark their ballot and submit through the portal and not rely on email. We felt like this was a good security measure, a good service as well to those individuals. And we also were able to implement that due to a court decision for the visually impaired in North Carolina back in 2020. So that system's still in place. And I think, I know that there are states that can't implement those laws or who haven't implemented those laws, but I think North Carolina is a real testament to the success of that and the benefit that it really does serve to our military and overseas citizens.
That's great. So this is the last question before we wrap up, and this is to everyone. It begins, Ted Selker, who's on the webinar, asked, do you all work to have cameras in counting rooms and oversight over every step of the process of processing voters and ballots? And I think it's a broader question of, in this time of increased distrust, I think some counting rooms now, I'm not sure in any of your states, like they're putting in glass walls and broadcasting it on the internet so that people can visually inspect. Like, are you doing transparency things? And do you feel like that moves the ball forward at all?
Well, we're practicing what I like to call radical transparency here in Arizona. And in fact, Pinal County, just south of the Metro Phoenix area, has just finished construction back in June on a new warehouse where once you walk in to the main reception area, and there's a room on the side where all three of the walls are all glass, and the entire ballot processing system was built around that fishbowl. So observers can sit in this room and watch through the windows all of the ballots moving from the point where they are received, signature verified, opened, tabulated, all the way through the process. And then at the top of the room, there are large screen televisions that show the cameras where all of the drop boxes in that county are watched 24/7 on the camera. So you can sit in that room and watch the entire process. Really phenomenal way of looking at things. Coconino County up in Flagstaff did something similar. It's not as grandiose, but it's certainly observers can watch every bit of the process all the way through. We did that in Maricopa County when I was the county recorder down there, and we kind of sort of readjusted the tabulation center to really open up the process and show folks exactly what was happening. That's the thing for me that has really helped a lot, is just like pouring out all of the information. And when people ask questions, we're like, well, did you check that out? And did you check that out? As a matter of fact, quick little anecdote, when we had those armed protesters outside of the tabulation center in Maricopa County, I actually had staff print QR codes on big sandwich boards, the Vote Here sandwich boards, and the QR codes were to the cameras inside the tabulation center. So the folks that were out there protesting were actually looking at their phones, watching the cameras inside. I did it kind of to troll them a little bit, but it was like, hey, you guys want to protest, fine, but check out the QR code. You can see what's happening inside the building. So yeah, sunshine is the best disinfectant.
Oh, that's it. So lots of sunshine moves. Alan, Karen, and like, are you doing transparency kinds of things?
Just very briefly, I can say from Philadelphia in 2020, I know we had a lot of allegations that observers weren't allowed in the processing area, and that voting or the counting of votes had stopped. Meanwhile, you could look at our live feed 24 hours a day from the comfort of your home if you choose. And I'm answering calls about observers not being there when there's 30 from each party standing right there in front of me. So I agree that transparency is a really important key to strengthening confidence in this process. I wish it were more effective than in my limited experience. It has been, but that's no reason to not do it, and do everything you can to maximize it.
Right. We got to do it even though we're not sure how much it moves the ball forward. Yeah, Karen.
Some of these processes are not new in North Carolina. We don't necessarily have the 24/7 live feed in our counties, but the counting meetings, the pre-election testing, the post-election audit meetings, those are all public meetings. And, you know, one of the things that the pandemic brought about was streaming meetings. And so many of those events are streaming in most of our counties. And we've also had provisions in our laws for decades where people can be at the polling places on election day to see the opening and see the closing of those polls. So there's a lot of avenues for people to see those processes taking place. And, you know, there was an earlier question about, you know, how we're trying to build voter confidence and about transparency. We were, unfortunately, national attention to the fact that we needed to call for a new congressional election after some ballot harvesting issues in Congressional District 9. And so we built out our voter confidence campaign around the hashtag #YourVoteCountsNC. We have done extraordinary measures with our website, with social media, with press availability to try to tell our stories and make sure that not just, you know, live video feed, but other avenues are there for people to understand how elections work. And I know my colleagues have done the same. And, you know, I think that's the real key. Become a poll worker, go to the meetings, do things to get involved, to understand these processes and all the layers that are in place to make sure that people's votes count and are counted accurately.
Thank you so much. And I'm reading a bunch of comments from the Q&A, and I think one resonant thread is people are very reassured by the conversation that we've just had. And that makes me think not enough Americans are hearing this kind of conversation, which would generate some assurance. And to me, that assurance comes from seeing the three of you and Jocelyn and your expertise, which just like keeps going and going, the amazing things that you've done, your dedication, and to me, your incredible courage in the face of these challenges. And you are truly the unsung heroes of American democracy. So it's really a privilege to be able to talk with you this afternoon. I wish you Godspeed in the next 5 weeks and the 3 weeks after that. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much for taking your precious time in this election.